So in my last video I mentioned that I was really excited to see Greta Gerwig's Little Women adaptation because I had just read the book in class recently and I finally saw it and I loved it. It was so good. So I figured I would do a video just talking about all of my thoughts because I have so much to say. Ahead of time, I'm gonna say I overall loved this movie so much. I thought it was great. I thought it captured the spirit of the book really well. But there are some things about it that I don't like, as there are with literally every single movie that I watch. We're just gonna talk about it all. But yeah, I loved it, so don't come for me. First, I'm gonna talk about the things that I didn't like as much so that we can end on a positive note. One thing about this adaptation that I both like and dislike is its experimental form, kind of. I was kind of shocked at the beginning because it starts with like where the characters are at the end, so I was like, what? Like, is the film wrong? Are they playing it at the wrong place? Like, is this the start? And on my second viewing, I was fine with that. I totally get why they did it, but it was a little jarring at the beginning. Another thing to say about that though is, so I also went with some of my cousins, and my 16-year-old cousin liked the movie, but she was really confused because she wasn't familiar with the story previous to seeing the movie, and I think that's something that probably similar viewers struggled with. The time jumps can be kind of hard to follow if you're not like super familiar with the story, but I overall think that the time jump thing was a good creative decision. Another thing that didn't always work as well as it should, while I understand why they did it, was, so 7 years pass between like the end of the book and the start of the book, and so obviously the characters are gonna look and act different, but like the oldest characters, Joe and Meg, they're like 15 and 16, so it's a lot more believable like when you jump forward to the future. But one that was kind of like, most of the time was done really well, but sometimes was just a bit much for me, is Florence Pugh when she was like being child Amy, which is not her fault. She did like very well with like what she was given. It was just sometimes hard to hear her say these like very, very childish lines, like when she got her hand cut and like when Joe and Meg wouldn't let her go with them to the theater. That I just like couldn't, it felt so weird that like an adult woman, or like what we know as an adult woman, which is Florence Pugh, hearing her say these like very whiny and childish things was like kind of like jarring sometimes, and it felt weird. But like, again, I am glad they kept the same actress, because having them all be the same except for Florence Pugh would have been weird. So there's also a scene, I don't have a problem with adaptations of classic books changing certain things. I'm totally fine with that, because I think that sometimes it serves the story better than it does in the book. And so I have no problem with like that. I don't have a problem with like making certain alterations for like creative choice, as long as they like feel organic and work well. And there was one scene in the movie that I won't say I hated it because everyone's acting was good. It was just like, I didn't like how it was written. And that was the scene when Joe first shows Bear. I know his name is, they call him like Frederick in the movie, but in the book they always call him like Professor Bear, so I'm just, that's what my brain is fixed on, so I'm gonna call him Bear. The scene when Bear first reads Joe's writing in the movie, it was very different from the book in a way that I did not like. So if you're not familiar with the book, how it happens in the book is Joe's at this boarding house. She's writing these like sensational stories to sell and like make money for her family, to take Beth away. And it's very clear in the book that Joe isn't proud of the stories that she's writing at this time, and is even like literally ashamed of them. Like she doesn't think they're good. She thinks they're like shitty and bad and like too scandalous, I guess. And so how Bear finds out about it in the book is they're published anonymously in the newspaper. Some of the kids are reading the stories and they're like enjoying them. And then Bear sees them and is like, kids, this is like scandalous stuff. Like, you shouldn't be reading this. It's corrupting the minds of the youth. And Jo overhears it and feels ashamed. And then she burns all of her stuff that she wrote. It didn't feel true to Jo's character, how they portrayed it in the movie. In the movie, they portray it as like, she shows them willingly to him and is like, do you think they're good? Like, do you think that they're like the best thing you've ever read? Because I'm like so amazing and no one has ever told me that I'm not good. And Jo just acts like such a brat in that scene. Like, she like almost ends their friendship just because like she didn't like that he was like criticizing her. And I just didn't like that that made her look so snotty, because I don't think that's how Jo is. And in the book, it's nice to have that moment of where she like really is like kind of having a moment of humility, because she is so confident. And she's like so willing to share her work and confident in her work and confident in her abilities as a writer, that it's nice to see her have a moment where she is like humble, and humble also in the way of like, now she makes the realization that like she needs to write for herself, not what she thinks will sell necessarily. And so I just didn't really like the way they handled that in the movie, but that's not that big of a deal. So my biggest thing that I didn't like was, I'm very hesitant to say this because people are very attached to this person, and I don't have any problems with him. I did not love this adaptation's version of Laurie. I think he did a good job, I will preface. I liked him as Laurie. I really liked his look as Laurie. It was very boyish and like adventurous. But he just seemed like more rude than he is in the book. Like, he was like rude to a point that he was almost unlikable in this version. And I think that it's the heart of Little Women is like this little family that they've created, and I feel like he was just so mean sometimes. Like, specifically like with the scene when he's at the ball and Meg is like all fancy and stuff, and he's like, I hate your dress. Like, he does that in the book, but I don't know, it struck me as way more like mean and hostile in the movie than it did then. Same with like when he met up again with Amy in Paris. He seemed way, maybe I'm just not remembering the book correctly. I just didn't like how, I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me at some points. Another thing, and this isn't Timothée Chalamet's fault at all, it's more just like the way the script was written. This is gonna intertwine with something that I liked. So I liked that they did a better job of showing the development of Laurie and Amy's romantic relationship, because in the book that feels kind of like thrust in at the end. So I think I like that, but I think that they also kind of sacrificed Jo and Laurie's friendship a little bit more than I feel they should have, because yes, he ends up with Amy, but like it seemed like the film was understanding a lot how important Jo and Laurie were to each other, even though like she didn't return his romantic feelings. So I don't know, I kind of just wish they had like showed more scenes of that, and also shown how much more Laurie was there for the family than he was just there for Jo, if you know what I mean. Oh, one last thing that I didn't love about this adaptation was how Jo, like, once she is like lonely and like at the end, that she like takes back what she said and like tries to get him back and like get him to marry her. I did not like that, because as far as I can remember, that didn't happen in the book, and I don't think it needed to go there for it to still achieve what it wanted to achieve. It kind of just made her kind of pathetic looking, to be honest. And if Jo's anything, I don't think she's pathetic. So, I mean, I guess it's still kind of true to the book in terms of how she was feeling very lonely and vulnerable. I just didn't like that they actually physically had her go, like, send him that letter. That's just me. So, now that we've gone on all of that, I'm gonna talk about the stuff that I totally loved. So, upon reflection, I do love the time jumping. It makes the story hit you in like a very different way than if you just go in chronological order, because in chronological order, honestly, the story is a lot more disappointing because it's their children and everything is fun. You have all the like best and like most fun moments of the book, all the most iconic moments that everyone talks about, and then Meg gets married, and then from then on everything is suffering, kind of. And it's still good, but it's kind of like a bummer. And I think if you've read Little Women, you'll know what I mean by that. So I did like the time jumping stuff. I thought that was a really creative way to do it, and having it be like Jo's memories instead of just like randomly time jumping, I think that worked really well. It made me feel nostalgic, as if that was my own life, like as if like I actually lived Little Women. And I don't know, I just really liked that. It was really, really well done. I also thought like Greta Gerwig's direction in the scenes when like all the family members are there together was so stellar. Like they're all, it's just like how a real family is, like especially with the sisters, how they can like scream at each other and then be hugging each other the next second. I don't have sisters, but I do have a brother, so I get it. Kind of. I just thought it was a very realistic dynamic. Again, reiterating from before, I did think Amy and Laurie's relationship was pretty well developed, but I've talked enough about that. Saoirse Ronan in general, amazing. Okay, honestly, like the whole cast and amazing, but the stars were definitely like Saoirse Ronan and Florence Pugh, although everyone had their shining moments, which I also appreciated. My dog is barking because there's a giant fluffy dog walking by outside. I'll wait. I think he's done. Saoirse Ronan, she's probably my favorite actress ever. I literally love every single thing that she's ever done. And the others are all amazing too. I'm just not as like emotionally attached. We're gonna talk about this scene with Marmee and Jo in the attic after Beth has died. That scene is so fantastic. And I think it's fantastic equal parts because the writing is so good, and also Saoirse Ronan's delivery is so good. And when that moment came, I knew it was coming at some point, because that little speech is in the trailer. The like, women have hearts and souls, not just beauty or whatever. They're good for more than just love. And so like that wasn't a surprise. But then like when she says that whole like women empowering speech, and then she pauses, and then she's like, "But I'm so lonely." Everyone cried. Just everybody cries. Because if you don't cry, like what? Do you have a heart? I don't know. I think a lot of people are like it is good. Like I think it's good to empower not just women, but people, saying like you don't have to have a significant other to complete you. And like I totally believe that. I think that's true. Can you stop barking at the man across the street? He's just living his life. Leave him alone. Well, he might just keep barking, so I'm just gonna talk. It's fine. But at the same time, like, especially now, I think it really hit to now, because in this age, I feel like we're all, whether you're in a relationship or not, I think we're all just lonelier than people used to be, because technology allows us to be so isolated while also feeling like we are in the mix, but like there's still something missing, if you know what I mean, because we still crave like human connection and like intimacy, and I think that's just human. But yeah, that scene was very, very powerful. Another scene that I thought was so gut-wrenching and amazing, and another reason why the time jumping thing worked so effectively, is when they showed Beth's initial sickness and then contrasted it with her death. That was so heartbreaking, because first you cry because Beth lives, and then seconds later you cry because Beth is dead. And showing that contrast like right next to each other hurt. They knew what they were doing. They knew they wanted me to cry, and I did. Twice. Small thing, but I really liked Mr. March in this adaptation, because in the book, he's kind of like a drag. It's kind of a drag when he comes home, because you're having fun with like just like the family and like women and stuff, and he comes home and he's like the man of the house, and it's like, I don't really want you here, to be honest. Like, I could care less. But in the movie they made him like more of a comic relief character, which I think worked really well and kind of showed more like why the girls' personalities are the way they are. Because like Marmee is very like sweet and like saintly, but like all the girls have a sense of humor, you know. Oh, another thing, I really liked how Meg wasn't like the biggest focus in this movie, but I loved her scenes with like her struggling with money and like the fabric. I thought that scene was so beautiful with like her husband, and like Emma Watson acted great in that scene. Like you could see like the shame in her face just like roiling off her. It was very good. Another thing that I liked was the ending. I like how they paid homage to Louisa May Alcott when Jo, you know, sells him the novel Little Women, and her like fighting for her copyright. Because if you know anything about Louisa May Alcott, you know that like she didn't really want to write Little Women. She wrote it to sell to adolescent girls, and it wasn't the passion of her life. And it's been highly speculated that she didn't really want to marry Jo off at the end. Like, I don't think that was her original intention. Of course, we can never know for sure, but like that's just what people say, I guess. So I thought it was really cool because the way they did it with this adaptation, they still stayed true to the book by like having Jo marry Bayer, start the school, everybody lives happily ever after. But they also left some like ambiguity where we don't actually know like if that happened. When she goes after Bayer, we don't know, because the publisher, he's like, she doesn't end up marrying either of them. And so far this novel has been like autobiographical, so it kind of implies that like in real life Jo actually doesn't marry Bayer and none of that stuff happens, and then he forces her to, so then she rewrites the ending. So we don't know if that was like her real ending or if that is just her book's ending. So I thought that was really interesting and very clever how they managed to like stay faithful to the book while also telling like Louisa May Alcott's story, kind of. Another thing about the ending that I loved is that when Jo opens the school, it's not just for boys, because in the book it's just a school for boys, and I thought that was so weird and out of character, because like Jo throughout the whole book is like talking about like the importance of like women being educated and like following their passions and like being self-reliant. So I thought it was so strange that she was only gonna teach boys. So I'm glad they did boys and girls, because that just seemed very weird to me in the book. Overall, I give it 5 stars. I loved it. Yeah, I'm sure I missed some of the things I liked and disliked, but I think this is a pretty good summary of how I felt. I guess I'll just close by saying I think this movie is really important. I think that most people will be able to get something out of it and connect emotionally really strongly to the characters. And I foresee this being one of my new favorite movies. Like, my favorite movie is the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley, because I also love Keira Knightley. And I see this being on par with that with time. I'm very glad the movie exists. I'm very glad I read the book right before. It made it a very cool experience for me to see how they adapted it. So I think that's all I have to say about this movie. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and I would love to keep talking about this because I'm a nerd, so I would love to talk about it more. What did you think? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys again soon for another video. Bye!